Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome, or shall I say welcome back to Employment Rewired, Mercy Corps' culminating learning event for the Youth Impact Labs program. My name is Britt Rosenberg. I'm Director of Corporate Partnerships with Mercy Corps, and I'm incredibly excited to be here today to talk with you about what's next, the future of youth employment, for our fifth and final session of the event. I want to start out by thanking the Mercy Corps Youth Impact Labs team. I want to thank Google.org, who has funded the Youth Impact Labs program. I want to thank our audience who has tuned in from all around the world over the last couple of days. And I also want to say thank you to Cellastream, who's provided the streaming capabilities for this event. Thank you so much. So a quick introduction for those of you who are just now joining us for this session. Mercy Corps is a global organization working in more than 40 countries around the world on some of the world's most pressing challenges. We bring innovative solutions to challenges such as youth unemployment, climate change, and disaster. One of our flagship initiatives, and an initiative that you've been hearing a lot about over the last 2 days, is our Youth Impact Labs program. This is a program that seeks to foster innovation to meet the challenge of youth unemployment and underemployment around the world. Impact Labs was created because we know that the world is young. We know that in Gaza, the median age is around 17, in Iraq it's 21, and in Ethiopia it's 19 years old. Coupled with the youth bulge is a lack of good jobs. In sub-Saharan Africa alone, we know that nearly 50% of young people are experiencing long-term unemployment, and about 80% are working in the informal sector. We also know that at the same time, there has never been greater promise or opportunity through digital technology than what we're seeing today. We know that digital technology can promote skills development, access to market opportunities and networks, and can also create new models of work like gig work. And the Impact Labs program has been able to drive huge impact for young people, specifically by investing in the gig economy. Over the last 2 days, I know many of you have been joining us. We've heard a lot from the Youth Impact Labs team, as well as experts from the field on what the main learnings of the Impact Labs program is, as well as other learnings from our sector. We've heard a lot of great ideas and insights. We've talked a lot about technology and how it's such a critical component of the future of work, but that tech alone is not a panacea. And comprehensive support for tech platforms for gig workers is critical for their success. We've also talked a lot about the importance of quality work. It's not just a job, but it needs to be a quality job. And tech platforms should provide or help connect workers with adequate social protections and wraparound services. We've also spent a lot of time talking about resilience. So the last session many of you joined for was focused on just that, how important it is to drive resilience for not only workers, but also platforms, so that they can withstand the shocks like what we're seeing now with COVID-19. So with the last 2 days of conversations, we hope that this has been critical grounding for us to kind of put our heads up, think forward, and look at what is next in the future of youth employment, particularly as we emerge into this post-COVID-19 world. So with that, to have this conversation, I am joined by 4 wonderful panelists. We have today joining us Natasha Jamal. She is director with MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth. She's overseeing strategy and work in the Middle East and Africa region. We have Gituku Ngene. He should be a familiar face for all of you since he's joined us yesterday for some of the discussion. He's our post-investment and learning advisor with the Youth Impact Labs team at Mercy Corps, where he works with high-growth enterprises. I'm also joined by Rani Deshpande, a technical expert and consultant with CGAP, with expertise in financial inclusion, youth economic empowerment, and poverty alleviation. And we also have joining us Najem Ghraibeh, an economist with years of experience working with the government of Jordan. Najem is currently serving as economic policy advisor with the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today, and thanks to our audience for joining us. We are going to start out with about 30 minutes of dialogue, and then we're going to hand it over to our audience to help drive the conversation. So as we go, for those of you watching on Facebook Live, please enter your feedback, comments, questions into the comments function, and we'll be able to address as many of those as we can as the session progresses. So to start out, I would like to hand it over to our panelists to just do quick 1-minute introductions. Please introduce yourself and your organization's work specifically in the future of work space. And we'll start off with you, Natasha.
Thanks, Britt, and thank you to the Mercy Corps team generally for having me here today. So I'll start with a few quick words about the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth more broadly. Not many people know about the Center for Inclusive Growth, but it was set up by MasterCard to really think about how we can bring all of MasterCard's assets to the table to drive social impact. And when we talk about assets, we of course are talking about philanthropic funding, but also we're talking about our technology, we're talking about our experts and expertise, and we're talking about the partnerships that we have with organizations all around the world. And so at that level, at sort of the center level, our work is focused on 3 main pillars. One is around financial security. The second is around economic development, and specifically how we can use data and insights to help shape efforts related to economic development. And thirdly, unsurprisingly, our third pillar is focused on the future of workers. And we very consciously decided to name this pillar Future of Workers rather than Future of Work, just as a reminder to us all that workers very much and real people very much sit in the center of all of this and will always be the cornerstone of the work that we do. And so when we think about Future of Workers, our work cuts across, I'd say, 4 pillars. One is around insights. So through partnerships with research institutions and academic institutions and economists, really trying to answer outstanding questions related to things like lifelong learning, portable benefits, economic mobility for low-skilled workers, etc. The second is around the impact space, which really is around collaborating with like-minded organizations and entities and funding organizations that are doing great work and implementing projects on the ground to tackle some of the challenges and address the opportunities as they relate to the future of work and future of workers. The third is around infrastructure, which is really around looking at how we can combine the technological assets and the commercial objectives of MasterCard with philanthropic objectives in order to be able to address opportunities pertaining to portable benefits and lifelong learning. And then finally, we operate on the sphere of looking at influence, which, similar to what we're doing today, is all about bringing experts around the table to share lessons, insights, experience, expertise, to really sort of understand where the opportunities and gaps are in terms of tackling what the future of work holds.
Wonderful. Thanks, Natasha. Over to you, Gituku.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Really glad to be joining you today for this conversation. I work with Mercy Corps, which Britt just introduced, and more specifically been with Youth Impact Labs for the last couple of years. And Youth Impact Labs is part of our youth employment work. And just to to flag that, youth employment is one of our big bets within Mercy Corps, because we do realize that, a large section of the population that we serve across the world is young people, and youth employment continues to be a very pressing challenge across, the developing countries that we work in. And so under Youth Impact Labs, which is one of our flagship programs, our mandate has been to identify and test tech innovations that are geared to address youth unemployment. Specifically, we've worked with a host of startups that have the potential to catalyze job creation at scale. And so over the last 3 years, we've provided support both in terms of funding and technical assistance to these companies. We've worked with about 26 companies, social enterprises in East Africa and the Middle East. In East Africa, we've worked in Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. And, with these companies, what we've been striving to do is to identify how do we build an ecosystem and platforms that, can connect young people to jobs. And so through our work, we've helped, these platforms build technologies from scratch where, they've either built these platforms or write applications and the like. We've worked with companies to help them pilot new initiatives across different markets, maybe beyond boundaries or within new cities. We've helped them, innovate interesting or viable business models that can help them accelerate how they onboard their workers and their merchants onto the platform. And so overall, this speaks to Mercycorps, spirit of innovation around the world of work. Actually, our strategy around youth employment is called the world of work. And we seek to not just do this ourselves, but also partner with different players in the ecosystem, particularly private sector, that has the efficiency and the drive to, drive these sustainable solutions. Government, which is a really core pillar of, ensuring, inclusivity, and, our peers at large who are, driven by the same agenda and mantra as ourselves. And so this really builds onto the, idea around the future of work and what we see as, the future of the world of work across the board, both in, emerging markets as well as developed markets. And so this is a really exciting conversation for us.
Thanks, Gituku. Go ahead, Rani.
Hi, and thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be part of this event to mark the achievements of a project that I respect a lot. I am currently working with CGAP to explore the potential of platform work to contribute to the livelihoods of marginalized people in developing countries, and specifically to see how and whether financial services can help that happen while mitigating some of the risks and downsides of gig work. The first thing that we are trying to do is build a solid evidence base, among other things, by commissioning in-depth qualitative research on the position of workers, especially female workers, in the platform journey, their relationship to and experience of platform work, their trajectories into and out of it, and how it fits into their livelihood goals. We hope that this research will shed light also on what financial services can do to maximize the upsides of platform work and minimize or manage at least some of the well-documented downsides, as well also as what financial services can't do, what might require instead or in addition other players or service providers or larger legal, regulatory, structural, or infrastructural changes.
Great. Najem, we'd love to hear a bit from you as well.
Thanks, Britt. It's a pleasure joining you here today. Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Najem Ghraibeh. I'm the Economic Policy Officer in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. I'm based in Amman, Jordan, the Middle East. The UK has been very supportive to the Jordanian context. In 2016, the UKAID launched the JCOP, Jordan Compact Economic Opportunities Program, which is the largest whatsoever. The program promotes economic development and opportunities in Jordan for the benefit of both Jordanians and Syrians refugees. The program also enables greater labor market flexibility, attracts new inward investments, and opens up economic market for Jordan goods and services, creating new jobs for the Jordanians and Syrian refugees as set out in the Jordan Compact. It also helps in developing infrastructure to reduce social tension. The program provides also help to Jordanian hosts to maintain their resilience and economic stability. And in 2019, the UK government hosted the London conference to support the Jordanian government efforts to attract new investment opportunities, create more jobs, and promote the reforms the Jordanian government is taking. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again for joining us. Now that we have introductions underway and our audience knows a little bit about the work that each one of you is doing, I want to kind of dig in. I mean, the theme for this session is really on the future of work. So we've talked a lot about the future of work. We've talked a lot about the gig economy over the last couple of days. In the last session, we heard from Sharmi and Michelle that the future is already here, and that it's gig work, and we need to mainstream it. And so I know you all have, a wealth of background and experience in this space. And so when you kind of look at what's next for the future, thinking about the impacts of COVID-19 and adaptations that have needed to happen over the last few months that will continue to need to be made going forward, what do you see the future looking like? What are some of the key trends that you're seeing emerging either in the tech space or in partnerships or in the donor space that you'd like us to be aware of as we go forward? And I think maybe we can start out with you, Najem, to speak. You're an economist. I think you have a lot of insights and can give us a good kickoff for this question.
Thanks, Britt. It is very important. So it is clear that the world post-COVID is much different than the one before. The pandemic has taught us in a very short period of time how fragile our economies are and how well connected we are to each other, but above all, it showed us how to be united despite being socially distant. This pandemic increased the use of new technology, reduced the need for human capital, and created a new line of demand for human capital needs. I believe that it is most important to continue this support to ensure that businesses can thrive post-COVID-19. Young people currently studying are being protected, and the young people furthest from the labor market are also protected. Domestically, Jordan had this program signed, the Youth Tech and Jobs project. The UK Minister approved the additional financing for this project as part of the Jordanian Economic Compact extension. The UK government provided $29 million, to the Global Concessional Financing Facility to underpin a $200 million World Bank loan to the government of Jordan, where this loan covers the supply of digital skills and supports the expansion of digital sector and digital government services, and establishes a project management unit at the Ministry of Digital Economy and Entrepreneurship to oversee the implementation, coordination, and reporting of such projects. I would like also to point out that the most important thing that this pandemic has showed us the new normal, being more flexible in working hours, being more flexible in working places. And I think this pandemic had definitely accelerated this transition.
Thanks, Najem. Rani, I'm going to hand it over to you. You have a lot of experience in thinking around kind of the importance of human capital. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that, and also any other kind of future-looking ideas or calling out trends that you're following that we should be thinking about.
Thanks, Britt. I think when I think about the interactions I've had with young people and trying to sort of find out about their lives and their relationship to work and how they see that going forward, one thing that strikes me, and I'm sure everybody here can attest to, is the facility with which young people who've grown up with access to technology, to internet in their hands, or even who've just gotten it in a couple of years, manage to adapt to and sort of manipulate e-channels for making money. Several years ago, I was in Vietnam doing focus groups with youth and vocational schools, and I was astonished to find out that almost all of them had some side hustle going via the internet, usually buying and selling things. We similarly just ran focus groups earlier this year in Nairobi with young entrepreneurs, and heard from them that they easily manage half a dozen different social media channels to promote their businesses. As a side note, we also heard from a couple of entrepreneurs who really quite expertly advised the other participants on how to manage multiple digital loans and use one to pay off the other and fend off the different requests for repayment. It was impressive. Now, these were working class youth in urban centers, with more relatively access to technology. And the picture in remote and rural areas is quite different. But I think that the lesson, for me at least, was that when you put technology in young people's hands, they can learn almost organically how to use it to make a living. The key, I think, is making sure they have that access, one, and two, just as important, the tools and the knowledge to manage that access to the best advantage.
Great. Thanks, Rani. Gituku, maybe you can speak to that. I mean, I think you have a lot of experience working directly with some of these businesses. How do you see things playing out in the future, particularly as Rani put it, once people have tech in their hands, they are able to make a living. I think you're seeing that play out through Youth Impact Labs. Maybe you can speak to kind of what the future looks like there.
Absolutely, yeah. And Rani, I'll just build on some of Rani's points because we've seen them in our work here in East Africa and also in the Middle East. And one thing I'd like to sort of emphasize is the disruptive nature of technology in terms of what we are accustomed to. And I think, COVID-19 has sort of, blown this to a very massive scale. So what we saw here in Kenya was, very rapid transformations of how the economy works, a lot of migration to digital platforms, both in terms of work and, commerce. And there's a very strong appetite for tech adoption, even amongst circles that otherwise were not very open to technology. And I think this is something that we will see, sustaining itself over the next couple of years, where we see pockets that otherwise, will not have jumped onto the digital economy bandwagon, opening themselves more to that. And in Kenya specifically and East Africa, what potential we are seeing as far as the future of work is concerned is the potential it has to formalize the informal sector. Now, in a country like Kenya, only 17% of the workforce is in the formal economy. Majority of workers are in what's called here the Juakali sector, and that's a sector, or that's a space where there's poor records about what people do. Government can barely keep track of who's doing what, and it's very hard to sort of figure out the patterns of work and what people do. Now, what we've seen is as platforms rise, they begin to formalize these sectors. So now you have records of workers, their transactions, how much, how many jobs they engage in, their financial flows, etc. And with this formalization, we see the potential to improve, the connection between these workers and jobs that they otherwise might not have gotten. So, for example, with one of the platforms that we've been working with called Link, what they've done is they've taken, they've built a platform that allows blue-collar workers in Kenya to access gigs across different parts of the country. Now, these otherwise would have been people who sit, at a corner shop or at the corner of the street and wait for the next client to reach out to them. But now what this means for them is that they can now access markets that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. And so we see this as a trend that's going to be sustained over time through the rise of platforms. However, through our work, we've seen gaps that, even as we think about the future of work, areas that we will need to step in to ensure that even as we make gains in this space, we are also, covering our bases to avoid falling into traps that we might be, fleeing from. So a couple of them, is the question around inclusion. So when you think about developing countries, there's always this gap between urban and rural areas. And so that's something that will really need to be addressed to ensure that, rural areas are also keeping up with the transitions in technology. Otherwise, we risk, leaving them behind significantly. When you think about gender in like the taxi hailing industry, we've seen like a massive gender gap. And so the question is, what can be done to ensure that, the gender gap, is being closed? Something else is social protection. COVID-19, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, has really exposed, the underbelly of, digital platforms, which is, worker resilience is still, a far cry from what we would want. And so even as we move on, we need to think, how do we build resilience among workers? How do we ensure that they're socially protected? And how do we ensure that they participate in the economy comfortably, decently, and with a lot of dignity? So those are some of the points from my side, Britt.
Thank you so much, Gituku. Natasha, I want to hear from you. I know that MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth has done a lot with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, and so I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about some of those needed social protections or some of the gaps, and also thinking about kind of any trends that you see going forward that we should be thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, Britt. And I think you nailed it when you said earlier that, as cliche as it may sound, the future of work is really already here, right? And I think what we know about the workers of today is that they need access to training, they need access to education and professional development. And regardless of what stage they are in their sort of workforce journey or their journey through the workforce, they're going to need these things throughout their lives. And despite the recent focus on the future of work trends, I think that workers and employers are still quite unprepared to make this transition and sort of navigate this changing world of work that as Gituku mentioned, is going to change even more post-COVID, or I think Najem mentioned that. And so workers are going to be even more vulnerable due to decreased access to predictable work, a lack of knowledge on how to navigate upskilling. We've talked a lot about digitization. And importantly, especially as we think about the gig economy and platforms, the absence of benefits that today are independent or sort of dependent on an employee-employer relationship. So this idea of portable benefits is one that the center is quite intrigued by and is trying to sort of dig into a little bit more to understand if there's a way for us to decouple the idea of benefits so that as a worker moves through their career or their life through the workforce, that they're able to carry over their benefits with them and sort of start to build a library or a sort of a resource bank of benefits that can then help with financial security and resilience down the future. Now, obviously, as you think about these things, the way they play out is going to differ from market to market and region to region because globally, countries are just at different inflection points as it comes to their workforce. But if we look at the Middle East and Africa and sort of carrying on with Gituku's focus on Kenya, we know, and you mentioned this, that the youth employment issue is still a massive challenge. And it's one that we've been trying to tackle for decades. We've done some good work, but the fact that it's still a challenge obviously means that we haven't reached the impact and the scale that we've been trying to get to really solve this problem in any meaningful way. And so as I and the center looks to the future of the region and the Middle East and Africa region, I think it's important to absolutely build on what's already been done, but also to start to address some of the gaps and understand where programming perhaps sort of fell short of certain things and trying to figure out how we can build on that a little bit more. And so what is that going to take? And I'm talking specifically about the youth unemployment issue because it's one that we're focused on, particularly at the center. One is it's absolutely going to take increased collaboration with the public sector, right? That's the only way we're going to institutionalize change. It's the only way we're going to be able to really drive scale. The second is it's going to take as we think about this idea of skilling and upskilling, we have to continue focusing on soft skills in addition to technical skills. And we're seeing, especially in the Middle East region, a big gap as it relates to soft skills. And when we think about skills and skills development, I think it needs to take a two-pronged approach. One is, what are the skills that youth need to navigate the world of work today, and sort of try and make that transition between school and work. But also to the point of and building on what everyone else has said, is how do we start to think about the future, digitization, skills, new sectors that are going to be up and coming, and how do we start to prep youth to take on those jobs and get the skills required to meet the changing job profile of the future. And lastly, you asked specifically about entrepreneurship, and again, Gituku touched on this, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done around trying to crack the credit space and the access to capital for small businesses and MSMEs around the world. Technology and digitization is doing some great things. We've seen some great examples in Kenya of how alternative data sources are being used as proxies for credit history. MasterCard and the Center actually have a great program there with Unilever and KCB Bank, using the purchasing history of micro retailers as a way to understand their credit worthiness. So there's a lot of really great and interesting things coming out as it relates to access to capital. But I think it's one area that we need to continue to focus on. And it's obviously a huge challenge, right? It's going to take innovation, it's going to take leveraging technology in new and innovative ways, and it's really going to take cross-sectoral collaboration across all of the ecosystem players in the financial ecosystem to really start to address this. But I think it's a huge opportunity for us to keep an eye on as we go into the future.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Natasha. So I want to kick that over to Rani, because I know you're talking about access to credit and kind of, excuse me, that's part of the bigger financial inclusion question. And so Rani, I'd love to hear from you a little bit about what the role of financial inclusion looks like in the future of work.
Oh, that is a big question. The future of work is a big question. I will take that specifically as it relates to gig work. I think, one way to think about the universe of current or potential platform workers is in relation to where they are on a, if you will, a gig worker journey that might be thought of in 4 stages. There are those who are aspiring to, but not yet in platform work. There are current gig workers who are in relatively low paid sectors. There are current gig workers in higher paid sectors, and there are those potentially out there who've been able to use platform work to transform their standard of living long term. And we hypothesize that the movement across the stages of this journey may have to do with the type of capital you have access to, and that includes human capital, physical capital, and financial capital. And we hypothesize that the role of financial services is really to enable access to the right capital package at the right time. And the forms that might take could include, at the very beginning, enabling acquisition of the basic technological package that is sort of the price of admission to this type of work, providing streamlined payment mechanisms, technologically enabled payment mechanisms that also facilitate entry into this kind of work. Then further down the road, smoothing lumpy income through savings or investment mechanisms, facilitating the accumulation or acquisition of larger amounts of capital to upgrade skills or equipment, protecting against income interruption through insurance mechanisms, and then hopefully transforming income into wealth by enabling the earnings to build human and physical capital even across the generations. Now, you're probably thinking that a lot of this actually sounds a lot like what financial services are supposed to do for people and businesses in the offline world as well. And I think that's very much correct. I think the difference with platform workers comes from the extent to which, as several other speakers have alluded to, their incomes and the procurement of that income is really mediated by technology. Which actually affords a different kind of opportunity for financial inclusion through digital financial services. Because these workers are already on some of the same tech rails that DFS rides on, because, as Gituku mentioned, their cash flows and work records are visible now, and because of the lower cost to serve that extends the so-called bankable frontier with digital financial services. But with respect to youth specifically, I think that we also have to keep in mind that the digitalization of financial services also carries some specific risks, given their generally lower levels of experience with money management. And according to brain science, until the age of 25, cerebral cortexes are still developing as well, making young people more prone to acting on impulses. And in fact, some of the research has shown that the tendency to be early adopters of technology can actually increase the risks that young people face. So in Kenya, for example, even though youth 18 to 25 are only 14% of the overall population, they're 19% of mobile phone owners and 21% of digital borrowers. We've also seen that younger borrowers in Kenya were more likely to use digital credit for non-productive purposes. So whether that's household consumption or utility bill or airtime, which you can argue with whether this is a non-productive use, but certainly some of it may be. And this is despite the astronomical interest rates that are sometimes charged on these loans. And in fact, that same research found that urban females under 30 were disproportionately likely to forego medical expenses in order to pay off a digital loan. Similarly, transaction data from Tanzania shows that younger borrowers, digital borrowers overall, had more late payments over 90 days and were less likely than older borrowers to pay on time, even though they take smaller loans. So I think that findings like this underline the importance of finding ways to safely induct youth into the financial system. And that probably needs to span both consumer protection measures and empowering individuals to protect themselves. So, on one hand, promoting quality standards in the provision of financial services to young people, but also working to identify high impact and cost-effective means for financial education.
Thank you, Rani. Natasha, do you want to build on that? I know that the Center and MasterCard, financial inclusion and access to financial services is critical to the work that you all are doing. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was sort of nodding away when Rani was talking there, but it's something that we have been very conscious about. The program I mentioned earlier with KCB Bank and Unilever, as much as we've seen the explosion of nano credit and microcredit in Kenya, for example, we've also seen, to Rani's point, there's been tons and tons of people who are being reported into the Credit Referencing Bureau for very small infractions, a lot of people defaulting, and actually trying to unlock access to credit is doing the complete opposite and blocking them out of the financial system entirely. And so and I can sort of speak, I think it's sort of best to illustrate how we feel about this based on what we're doing. But we were very mindful of this in our program in Kenya. And so what we tried to do differently to try and address some of these issues that Rani so rightly raised. One is the work that we're doing and the credit that we're dispersing is directly tied to the purchase of stock. So it's a closed loop credit where retailers can only use the credit to purchase from the distributor and purchase stock from the distributor. And that way we ensure that the credit is being used for business purposes and not being spent elsewhere. The second is that we have put a lot of time and effort, and the center specifically has come in with philanthropic funding to underpin that entire credit program that we have with capacity building and training for the micro retailers. And the one thing that we've been laser focused on is training around responsible credit management, the dangers of credit, the benefit. Obviously, how you can build your business using credit, but also what you need to be mindful of, the dangers of being reported into the CRB. And so we're trying to tackle all of those things and all of the learnings that have come out. Ultimately, we do believe that finding sustainable ways to unlock credit and help informal workers, and in our case, micro retailers, start to build a credit history, but B, start to sort of engage more closely with the formal financial sector and formal banks, will end up unlocking a lot of additional services that will help them down the line and start to build that resilience in financial security. And we've seen some of that already come to play with our merchants in our program, which is called the Jazaduka program. And sort of some of the support services that have been now opened up to them through COVID and financial assistance, because through our program, we're able to show different partners and funders that these merchants have a credit history, that they have paid well, that they've gone through the program for 2 years. And we're already starting to see some of the benefits of that. So I think it's very transformational. It's very powerful. But to Rani's point, I think we have to be mindful about the pitfalls and make sure that we are addressing the issues that are clearly there and that are huge risks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Natasha. I want to switch gears a little bit, and we only have a few minutes before we'll go to our audience questions. But we have a lot of implementers in our audience today. So I want to specifically ask a question to our funders. So Najem, would love to hear from you, as well as anything from you, Natasha, on any specific advice that you have for implementing organizations as we seek to partner with the donor community. Any words of wisdom for our implementers out there? Maybe Najem, we can start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Britt. So youth employment is going to be a continuous challenge for Jordan and the whole region, but comes with great opportunities when we understand that median population age in Jordan is 22.8. I would say that my advice to the implementing partners would be implementing partners should collate their efforts and work hand in hand through increasing coordination with all stakeholders, including donors, government, and other implementers, working towards achieving strategic goals and objectives that stem from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and especially the decent work and economic growth, and avoiding redundancy and focus on complementary of implementing partners in the youth employment area is required to achieve effectiveness and efficiency in delivery and in reaching an inclusive approach that can benefit all segments of the community. I think this also goes hand in hand with the need to change our look. There's a long-term structural change to the labor market as a result of COVID. And there is also a greater need for a continuous and focused FDI that we've seen for almost the past year. We've seen major shifts in FDIs as a consequence of the COVID and the interest rate and the exchange rate fluctuations.
Thank you, Najem. Natasha, is there anything that you'd want to add to that, like very specific advice that you'd have for organizations that want to seek to partner with the donor community?
Yeah, I would say sort of, and it's pulling from what Najem said, but really my one piece of advice is we need to maintain a laser focus on scale. And that's sort of easier said than done, I know. But if I were to pick sort of two key things, and it's really been the theme of this conversation, but two key things that need to be that we really need to sort of look at in order to drive scale. One would be collaboration, and Najem sort of touched on this, but really sort of making sure that we are working, that we're not working in silos, right? That we're working in concert with private sector, with public sector, with other implementing organizations, and really trying to figure out how we can leverage the strengths across different players, how we can leverage the experience and the expertise across different players, so that we're not doubling efforts and we're really sort of pooling resources to drive maximal impact. So for me, I think collaboration is key in sort of understanding how to pull that different partners in to the work that our implementing partners are doing. And the second, sort of unsurprisingly, again, is really trying to look at the use of technology to drive scale and to drive change in a scalable and sustainable way. I think Mercy Corps is doing some great work in this space already. For example, I'm thinking about the Micro Mentor platform, which admittedly the center is funding. So this isn't a plug for Micro Mentor, but we genuinely believe in the effectiveness of it. But it's a great example of how we're able to tackle a very real issue. In this case, it's access to coaching and mentorship for small business owners, and bring in a technological solution that provides this coaching and mentorship in a way that's definitely scalable and that transcends geographical boundaries, and the impact and the results that we're seeing and that Mercy Corps is seeing across the globe with Micro Mentor in terms of enabling businesses to stay operational for longer and become engines of job creation. I think that all speaks to the value that technology can really bring to programs when it's used in a mindful and a meaningful way. I think it could be really transformational.
Wonderful, thank you. And we'll take a plug for MicroMentor. With that, I want to kind of close out this session with a final question for Gituku, and then we'll hand it over to our audience to see what questions they're coming up with. Gituku, we've heard a lot over the last couple of days about the impact of the Youth Impact Labs program over the last several years. We've talked a lot about kind of what key learnings look like. I'm wondering if you can paint a picture for us of what's next for that kind of work within Mercy Corps, either a Youth Impact Labs 2.0 or something similar that's really focused on the future of work. Can you quickly paint a picture for us of that?
Sure. I think what Youth Impact Labs has meant for us, or this has really taught us that there's an opportunity to tap onto technology as a tool for job creation, and this is something that we want to sustain over time. So even as we look into the future, what we're looking to is to build an ecosystem, to build a digital economic ecosystem with the frame of job creation in mind. And so what we're looking at is building traction, scaling the platforms that we have worked with and that we see in the space, as well as building partnerships and convening actors to really build momentum around what we're already seeing. And I think it alludes a lot to what Natasha is saying, because I think what the biggest word for us is how do we scale the platforms and the mechanisms that we are already seeing beginning to develop themselves in emerging markets. And then the other thing is we've identified a couple of gaps over time, and I did allude to a couple of them initially, where we see a space for organizations like Mercy Corps and our peers to step in. And so even as we look around, programming on youth unemployment in the future of work, we do look at things like, financial inclusion. And so in that space, one of the things we're exploring is how do we tap onto, technologies like data science to really unearth the potential that sits within these platforms. Rani and Natasha have alluded to the point around workers on these platforms still struggle to access financial services, yet these platforms sit on rich data sets. How can we catalyze the use of that kind of data to unlock financial inclusion opportunities for them? Again, we also look at inclusion or inclusivity as an area that we sort of want to think about, and we see Mercy Corps and development organizations as very well positioned to step into this space to really handhold private sector into moving into marginalized areas that might not be what are the dynamics in some of these rural pockets, in some of these marginalized areas, and what models can we collaborate with private sector to really ensure that these areas are not being left behind, as well as bringing up the lens of gender inclusion, etc. As areas that we need to think about. The last one is, and I won't talk much about this because I mentioned it earlier, but the question around resilience of workers. So thinking around how do we deliver tools that can help workers to be resilient. So whether it's innovative models around insurance, around pensions, etc. How do we then build and weave this into platforms to ensure that workers are secured and that they benefit from digital platforms wholesomely? Yeah, so those are some of the areas that we're looking at here at Mercy.
Wonderful, thanks Gituku. Okay, I think we're going to transition over to our audience questions. Let's see, it looks like we had one coming in already. Okay, first question is from Anita, and this is for Natasha. I'd like to understand how you define and measure decent work. So you talked about the importance of the worker over the work and kind of thinking about the future of worker. She says, I think traditionally we thought of it as full-time and well-paying and not one that takes advantage of the worker, or mistreats them. How has that changed with gig work and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it sort of ties into financial security, right? So is it a job that provides the worker with resilience, that provides them with the tools and the resources they need to not just get by for a day or a week or a month, but really starts to build their resources to get by in the long term, to start to sort of save, to get access to insurance, to get access to other benefits that will really sort of help them navigate sort of consequences or circumstances that that they never thought would have come up, right? I mean, COVID is a great example there. So in my mind, decent work is really about work that drives financial security and that drives financial resilience beyond just a paycheck or a wage that sort of that enables you to live from a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Rani, do you have anything that you'd want to add to that on decent work?
No, I think that's a great definition. I really like the emphasis on work that ensures a certain level of financial security or stability, the work that enables resilience, and work that respects the dignity of the person. I think that those are three pretty key dimensions when we think about a definition of decent work. And, you know, it's not that gig work can't be compatible with those. We have traditionally conceptualized decent work as full-time, yes. But why the obsession with full-time work is to be able to ensure those things, right? So I think those are the prizes we have to keep our eyes on.
Great, thank you. Gituku, I saw you coming off mute. Did you want to add something?
Yep. Yeah. So an additional lens that we've added to the question around decency has been the question of growth, right? So when you think about workers who enter into these kind of jobs, a fair majority, at least of what we've seen, is they come in at entry level, and so even as we think about decency, we have to look into their aspirations around growing on these platforms. So, for instance, if you think about, micro work or outsourced work, as much as a worker might come in as a transcriber, the question is, and of course, the lower the entry point, the lower the income. But of course, a lot of these young people have aspirations. They want to grow. They want, just like a traditional career pathway. And so we look and we explore into ways of growing them across the, within the platform. So they can start as transcribers or image mappers, but then how do we grow their skills over time for them to take more rewarding and more paying jobs, to grow their incomes and also, their personal growth. So that comes with the necessity to integrate, skill development, continuous learning, etc. And so for us, that's a very critical component around the decency of work.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have another question coming in. The question is, how do you address infrastructure gaps, like internet access, in promoting rural dwellers to access platform work and other online opportunities? So this was coming in from Judith, and she's directing it at Rani or Gituku. So Rani, do you want to take this question? How do you address infrastructure gaps for rural populations?
It's a threshold question. I think the research that's been done in Africa, for example, so far, has shown that the biggest predictors of whether someone will be on a platform or not are simply geography, because of the lack of connectivity in rural areas, and that's very logical. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before when I said we're looking at what financial services can help, ways it can help, and also what it really doesn't have a primary role to play in. When we think about infrastructure gaps, we're really pointing to the need for large-scale and largely public investment. These are last mile delivery areas where the private provision of services is often not profitable on a unit basis. And, governments around the world have found ways to deal with that, whether by putting in place regulations that require private service providers to serve those areas in return for having access to more profitable areas, or by providing those services themselves, such as through the post office. So I think that similar models or hybrid models can and should be explored for the closure of the technological infrastructure gap as well.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple more questions coming in here. So Stephen says, the future of work is here, but do you think there are any unhelpful narratives in which the current youth employment agenda that we should drop as we move forward? So you spoke, Rani, to things that are working and things that aren't working. So maybe this is a question, let's see, any of you could take this actually. Are there things that we need to drop since the future is here, things that aren't working? Anyone want to speak to that one?
I don't want to dominate, but I do have a thought that I'd be actually really interested in the other panelists' opinions on. And it's going to be a little provocative.
Go for it.
I sometimes think that it's an unhelpful narrative to frame the question of youth unemployment, or the question of the solution to youth unemployment, in terms of programs that primarily affect the supply of labor. Because when we think about scale, I think that the biggest determinant of the unemployment rate is going to be the demand for labor. And I wonder sometimes in this field whether we spend more time talking about programs that address the quality of the supply of labor rather than the demand for labor and job creation at scale. So just throwing it out there, would love to hear what people think.
I see heads nodding. Natasha and Gituku?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think you have to absolutely tackle it from both sides. You can't have one without the other, and we tend to skew that balance a lot. I think what we've seen in a lot of programs, at least in MENA, is the sort of what I said very early on in the conversations about learning from what was, what could have been done better in the past, is really this lack of the actual sort of labor market interventions, and how do we start to sort of focus on that a little bit more, but also how do we start to bridge that gap, right? There could be jobs out there, or there are jobs out there, not enough certainly, but that youth don't have access to today or don't know of, right? So really thinking about this idea of the entire employment journey, from sort of skilling up to finding a job to sort of retaining that job, because how much are we actually sort of following up on youth who do get jobs, and how long are they retaining that job? And to Gituku's point, are they growing in those jobs? So really starting to take that holistic view of youth employment is something I don't think we do enough of today.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. And I think, for us at Massicor, market systems approach has been, something that has been very critical for us as an approach. And even as you think about youth impact labs and the way we've, framed our model, it's really thinking about the demand side, as the first starting point, and thinking, how do we work with, platforms that will absorb these young people, platforms that understand what the market needs, and then work backwards towards thinking, where are these workers? How can we then connect them to where they're needed? And then layer on some of these additional enablers, so skills. What's the market requirement in terms of skills? If you're thinking about worker growth, what are the financial tools that will enable them to participate more effectively in the market? So that has been a very critical part for us as Massicor when we think about youth employment, and it's something that we continue to scale across our different programs to ensure that the work that we're doing around the future of work is really sustainable in the way we formulate it and think about it here.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we actually only have 1 minute left, and I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we will be following up with folks. I just really appreciate the conversation. I feel like we could have had multiple sessions on this topic. So thank you all for joining us. I want to wrap up by just giving thanks again to google.org for funding the Youth Impact Labs program. Thank you to our audience who has tuned in from around the world, for everyone who has participated over the last couple of days. Thank you again to our Youth Impact Labs team and partners for the work that you're doing every day. A special thank you to Lauren Kaur, who did the event management for this event, and to Celestream again for the streaming services. So we invite everybody to keep in touch with us. Please keep in touch, reach out. There's a contact us button at the bottom of the event page. We will follow up on the unanswered questions. You can revisit all 5 of the sessions and watch them anytime, share them with your friends. We invite you to keep in touch with us going forward. So again, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful day, stay safe, and talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.